Once upon a time, before there was anything at all, there was nothing but thought, swirling in the void, the miasma, adrift on a sea of black, were colours sparkling into existence, ideas and concepts and thoughts. Some of the thoughts coalesced and merged, became stronger. And as these ideas swirled around that miasma, they began to form greater than light. They began to form as tangible, as corporeal beings. But they needed an anchor. And one anchor would not be enough for all three groups, for they all wanted different things. Some of them were arrogant and believed themselves golden children of the abyss. And they went back to form a group called the Seraphim. And those Seraphim split again into three factions. One faction became twisted in form and known as Demon. They sank to the bottom and built an inferno, deeper and darker than anyone had ever known. Any idea it had ever ventured was the abyss and the inferno. And above that all was the Elysium forests, formed of nothing but thought and will. Beyond these forests came together the children of the Fae, a group of seraphim that formed into different ideas and concepts of their own and needed an almost different category for themselves. The golden ones, the seraphim, went ahead and formed what they named to be Elysium, as they thought it an all-encompassing, all-governing force. And around Elysium they built a small city where they let lesser seraphim in through the walls to live in markets and whatever wealth they could muster up there, but never allowed within the golden city and on the golden pavements. That was allowed only for the seraphim. And among the first of them, was Brujan, a concept of protection, and believing himself to be divine, he protected it fervently. Every day he would place himself upon the barrens with a mighty sword and cut down anything that entered those barrens. And ahead of time, and time again, he slaughtered. And every day he returned to Heaven's Gate, where he was allowed onto the golden pavement covered in demon blood and fey blood alike. And his muse, Serendipity, would sing him a song that would harden his armor for the next day's battle and steel his resolve again. And his resolve was such that it lasted 10,000 years without waver. But eventually, after all that time of killing and blood on his hands, the question of divinity began to race through his mind. And he believed for a while that he needed a tour upon Midgard to shore his resolve. Perhaps 500 years would be enough. So, one day after battle, returning through the gates of Elysium, he returned to his muse and confided in her that he wished to have a sabbatical of sorts in Midgard. And Serendipity became furiously jealous. And that night, after singing her song, she stealed away to the council and snuck a message to them that Brujan was to slay every soul on Midgard that he ever saw in his 500 years. And with that time and Brujan's efficiency at what he did, they figured it wouldn't be 500 years before he would have taken every soul on earth. And so they called him in and they asked him a question as he presented his request. And they asked him if he would slay the wicked. And he proudly rose to his feet again, said, "Of course, I'll slay any wicked that stands in my path." And with that answer, he failed that test and was immediately exiled from heaven upon the betrayal and the lie of Serendipity. Of course, Serendipity didn't want this. She wanted him to stay in heaven, and she was shocked to see the portal open behind him. Thank you for the follow, Jenna. She was shocked to see the portal open behind him and to see him pulled through. And from Brujan's point of view, the pain was immense. Being pulled through that portal and back into the abyss, he began a descent that would last maybe 1,000 years. It would be hard to tell. But as he fell, the armor that had been hardened over 10,000 years of poisoned song began to tear from the sinew of his flesh. And with it, they took his idea of divinity and his idea of self and even his name as these pieces of armor ripped off his body, and it became twisting bones and flesh falling through the abyss. And eventually, of course, landing on the cold but burning floor of hell. And many souls noticed him there. And a dragon had spent time over the corpse. But the tinkerer, who lived under the gates of hell, saw promise in the former angel. The twisted bones and pulsing flesh that still screamed at the gates of hell was put into a barrow and wheeled unceremoniously down to a small cave where the tinkerer began hewing a mould out of the rock of hell, and he would fire it with the fires of hell. And he poured that flesh into the mould, stacked it up there and chained it to the wall and started to burn. And not much eventful happened in hell over those 500 years. But when that flesh emerged as Karaticus, it was nothing but anger. Anger and spitting hate. And it flew at the tinkerer, slamming him against the wall. Of course, terrified and demonic in nature, the tinkerer begged for his life, sought anything to say to save it. "You can get out of here," he said. "You can get back through the gates. You can be divine again. Let me show you. Save my life and I'll show you." And Karaticus stood for a second, still burning, still seething with hatred that he didn't understand. He calmed slowly and took his hand from the throat of the tinkerer. And what would I do to get back through the gates? And one day you will rise to Midgard again, not as demons, but in human form. And from there, well, you're on your own. I don't know how to get up there from there, but I'm sure you can work it out. Enlightened by this promise and sort of knowing that he needed divinity, Karaticus pondered on this as he walked the grounds before the gates. Eventually, with a heavy heart and not an understanding of why it was so heavy, "I'm glad you're doing well, Gabriel." He placed his massive and burning hands on the door and pushed the massive slabs of stone forward as those gates began to open to the first level of hell. Although fire and screaming and whispers of doubt were all around, Karaticus stilled himself and took a step forward. His loss was great, and he didn't remember his life as an angel, but he knew he had had divinity. So as he walked the floors of hell and began searching for his army, we're going to leave it there, and we'll pick it up tomorrow night at around about the same